The news of Bjornsson's death is huge, and a much-needed bit of good news for the people of Arcadia. Steelshod is cautiously optimistic. The players, of course, probably feel the way you readers do. Skeptical. The big bad evil guy dying to NPCs, off-camera? No way. They don't utterly disbelieve it. They know that I firmly believe that the world spins on whether the PCs are watching or not. In my games, yeah, big events do happen in other places, but usually, I at least give them the chance to know what's up and try to get involved. So, maybe Kilchester was a breakpoint. They could have stayed with Wigglesworth and ultimately fought Bjornsson, but they chose to chase down Hakon, trading one big bad evil guy for another. Possible, but they're skeptical. Still, the report is that the Marshal faced down a giant of a man, clad in a white bearskin, and killed him. They ask Hrodir and Drengi if there are any other white bear sarks. Drengi looks at him like they're stupid. Of course there are more white bear sarks. The frost bears are the greatest, most terrifying beasts on the land. The very best warriors and jarls venture into the frozen wastes to claim a frost bear's soul. There are several, though none as great as Bjornsson. There is Dagrun the thrice-wed, the only female frost bear bearsark they have heard of. She has wed 3 jarls, each dying in battle, and after that she took the mantle of frost bearsark, became jarl herself, and has eschewed taking another husband. Kolbjorn, the Stonebreaker, the youngest and newest of the frost bearsarks other than Bjornsson, hot-headed, ambitious, but possessing vast strength and fortitude, best known for his fondness for crushing his foes with huge mauls and other bludgeoning weapons. And there is Aleifir, the smith, a deadly warrior and a sorcerer that knows the secrets of making what Drengi call ice iron, named for its pale color. It seems Alexander and Joran no longer have to wonder where Bjornsson got his steel weapons and armor. They can't hide their surprise that a barbarian would know the secrets of steelmaking. Brjokar the Seeker, the only frost bearsark that primarily uses a bow, an enormous thing that can punch through several men in one blow. Many years ago, Brjokar went on a journey across the northern reaches of Rusk, and brought back new methods of bow-making and archery. All of his bearsarks, Vartror or not, are expected to learn the art of the bow. Then there is Gjul, the Hungry. Gjul has a reputation for viciousness, cruelty, and ruthlessness. Rather than facing down his frost bear in honorable combat, Gjul hounded the bear across the ice for weeks, driving away its food, until it finally died of hunger and exhaustion. The strength in a bearsark's skin is partly proportional to how much damage was inflicted upon the pelt. A ragged pelt cannot bear a strong connection, so bearsarks always try to kill the beast in an efficient manner. A clean spear stroke or arrow through the eye is always considered best. Gjul's skin was perfectly intact. Very powerful indeed. But Gjul's method was considered crass, dishonorable to the beast whose soul he wished to take, and he paid a price for his unorthodox method. Ever since he donned the skin, he has been cursed. Gjul hungers. He hungers the way the bear did in its dying moments, and no amount of food or drink can truly satiate him. The last frost bearsark that the Ulfsknar know of is called Hrafn, the Sage. Hrafn is old and wise, considered a holy man by the bearsark tribes. Before Bjornsson arrived, Hrafn was the closest thing to a jarl of jarls the bearsarks had, but he was more of a high priest, not a ruler. Each of the frost bearsarks are highly esteemed by their kin, and they each command the respect of their own tribe of bearsarks, Ulfsknar, and lesser men. Drengi says that there are other bearsark champions and jarls: Woden Two Souls, Tarvald Steelpelt, Asmundr the Blood Drinker, Unferth the Soulless, but the frost bear sarks are the most respected of all bear sarks. The rest of Steelshod is rendered somewhat speechless. They faced down Bjornsson and his army, an assortment of Svardic champions, and perhaps a few hundred bear sarks all told. But to hear Drengi tell it, there should have been 10 times that number, and half a dozen other white bear sarks. So, where the fuck are they? Hrodir and Drengi shrug. They were just scouts. Last they knew, most of Bjornsson's army was still waiting around in the south, along the coast. The wolves honestly try to help, but it's impossible to tell if the time they are referring to was before or after Kilchester. While Steelshod processes this new information, celebration planning begins getting underway. The king knows it would be churlish and wasteful to throw a huge feast and celebration to welcome the marshal, with all that's happened, but he also recognizes that his people need something to give them hope and happiness. Arcadia has been pulling in food and supplies from the inland fiefs ever since the firefall, so they have built up a small surplus. A small celebration is planned. Food will be brought to every square and tent village in the city. Everyone in Arcadia will have a full belly the night the marshal and the army return. Steelshod and the sons are invited to a small feast to be held in the inner keep and the king's palace. Yeomen and most mercenaries will celebrate in the courtyard. Knights, mercenary officers, and the lords in a great hall. Lord Marshal arrives with as much fanfare as possible, given the sad state of things in Arcadia. Steelshod, half prepared for the possibility that the incoming army is not Marshal at all, but Bjornsson, all heave a sigh of relief. It really is him, along with the remnants of his army. With the losses in the field and the bay, the Cadian army is perhaps a third of its original full strength, but they are delighted to see that Marshall's army includes some familiar faces. Lord Volk, still crippled but able to sit a saddle. Brutus Varley, looking healthier than they've ever seen him. And Lord Mortimer Wigglesworth, brought in unconscious, on the back of a wagon. That they survived at all is perhaps miraculous. Apparently, the siege lifted when Marshal began coming down with his host. After the third day of repeated attempts to storm the inner keep, Bjornsson and his army disengaged and disappeared. No sooner had he left than Marshal's scouts arrived. The armies joined forces at that point, but Wigglesworth suffered a grievous injury during the final storm at Kilchester, crippling his leg, and it has been festering since then. The army chirurgeons have done their best, but they fear he will succumb within a few more days, perhaps a week. Foregoing any sort of celebration or proper greeting, Agrippa immediately demands that Wigglesworth be brought to him, and he begins an arduous process of trying to save the Lord's life. Most of Steelshod are present, however, when Lord Marshal and King Edric meet in the courtyard. The Marshal recounts the story of how Varley's plan worked. They caught Bjornsson and his army skirting the edge of the Unkari hills, pinned them against a steep escarpment, and executed a series of carefully planned maneuvers. The Dynamite rabble were easily routed. The Kriegars and Svards put up a good fight, but most were killed, many scattered, and some were taken captive. Even the Bearsarks were handled through a combination of cavalry charges and heavy longbow fire. During the story, Varley approaches Alexander, quietly tells him that he's happy to see him, but he would like Alexander to examine the corpse after Marshal finishes his story. He has some misgivings. Perhaps the paranoia of an old man, perhaps not. Marshal faced down the legendary Bjornsson himself. He lost a dozen knights to the enraged white bearsark with his enormous spiked cudgel, but eventually they brought him down. Marshal uncovers the wagon that bears Bjornsson's corpse, a mangled ruin of a man, huge, 12 feet tall, white bearskin stained red, steel armor battered and pierced. A crowd forms. Yoren and Alexander quietly wait their turn to examine the body. Marshal continues his story. He mentions confirmation of a rumor they'd heard earlier. A massive army of Serpentes from Tarathia is indeed on the way, expecting to crush the Svards and drive them out. Due to arrive soon, but clearly too late. Everyone has a little chuckle. King Edric says this is good news, as the Serpentes could make good on the tithes Cadia pays the church. Perhaps lend some help to his people as they try to rebuild their lives. The crowd begins moving inside, to begin the feast and get the party rolling in earnest. Steelshod moves up to the wagon that holds Terbjornsson's body, murmuring amongst themselves. It doesn't fit. Terbjornsson was never the frothing, enraged warrior Marshall described. He always seemed subdued. Bored, almost. And now, with what they've learned from Hrodier and Drengi, the army can't have just been what Marshall described. The host Terbjornsson had at Kilchester had to be a fraction of his overall forces. Yoren is the first to peer into the wagon. Well, bugger, he says bluntly. Not him. Yeah, it's that easy to tell. The overall build and features are all correct, but it's a different man. A shame, Varley rasps. Understatement of the year. How could they have missed this? Easily, really. Wigglesworth has been injured and largely delirious. Varley and Volk did not engage directly with Terbjornsson the way Wigglesworth, Alexander, and Yoren did, and, well, how many 12-foot-tall white bearskin-wearing bear sarks in steel plate with huge spiked clubs can there be? They saw what they wanted to see. Alexander examines the remains and confirms that the steel armor is different too. Of a lesser quality, for one thing, and Terbjornsson's steel sword and axe are nowhere to be found. The only weapon in the wagon is the iron cudgel. Drengi looks at the corpse, sniffs. Stonebreaker, he says. Kolbjorn Stonebreaker. One of the 6 other white bear bearsarks, aside from Terbjornsson. Alexander and Yoren are getting a very bad feeling about this. They pull aside several members of Steelshod, tell them to get to the outer walls and into the city to make sure there's not some other army of Svards about to descend upon them during the festivities. They go inside to kill the party and harsh everyone's buzz. Yoren and Alexander stand before Lord Marshal and King Edric, the 2 most powerful men in Cadia, and they tell them the celebrations are premature. They explain the situation. The king grows increasingly agitated. Yoren and Alexander refuse to stand on ceremony. They don't sugarcoat it. They interrupt. They tell the cold, hard, blunt truth. But Alexander does so in a way that at least resembles diplomacy. Yoren is allergic to civility and deference unless he's talking to Alexander. Eventually, the king snaps at him for his impertinence yet again, telling him to hold his tongue or face consequences. Frustrated, he backs away and lets Alexander take over. Yoren steps off the dais and into the great hall. He mingles with some of Steelshod, not really talking, running through all the possible Svardic plans in his head. His eyes idly drift upwards, and he freezes. He sees movement in the shadowy upper rafters of the great hall's vaulted ceiling. Dark-clad fingers are clamoring through the rafters, the telltale shapes of bows strapped to their backs. As quickly as he saw them, he loses them. Yoren considers his options. Pushing his way back to the dais through the knights will take time and draw ire, drawing his bow in the king's presence even more so. Fuck all of that. Yoren is already near the wall of the great hall. He warns Prudence of what's up, tells a few other Steelshod to cover him, ducks into a quiet corner, and begins scaling a support beam. In short order, he's climbed up to the rafters himself, stalks over towards the likely position, assuming these figures are assassins. The rafters directly overlooking King Edric, Lord Marshal, and Alexander. Sure enough, he sees 2 men crouching in the rafters. One of them is watching below, a small bow strung and ready. The other one, distressingly, is watching Yoren. Yoren begins leaping over rafters, launching himself towards them as quickly as possible. The assassin looking down at the king raises his bow, as does the one looking at Yoren. Yoren knows his duty. As he sprints across the beams, he draws throwing knives. Elegant blades, Unkar pattern-welded iron, gained ages ago from a barbarian in the hills, and he throws them at the assassin aiming below. The knives hit home, sinking into the unarmored flesh of the assassin's throat and belly. The assassin's arrow goes askew. He topples off the rafters, crashing down onto the king's dinner table below and eliciting a chorus of shouts. The other assassin looses his arrow. He'd taken careful aim at Yoren before firing. It pierces through a gap in Yoren's tattered brigandine, sinking deep into his chest. He reaches the assassin as they both begin drawing melee weapons. The assassin pulls out a sword, trying to finish off his crippled enemy. Yoren, heedless of the burning pain brought on by every breath, engages in a quick, decisive duel. A flurry of steel and iron clashing, and in moments Yoren has earned another slash across his arm. The assassin, however, finds the 6 inches of steel in his chest even more disagreeable. Neither of them manage to keep their balance at this point. As they topple off the rafter, Yoren grabs onto the assassin, trying to use him to cushion the fall. It works, a little. All eyes on the great hall are on him as Yoren pulls himself to his feet, arrow still lodged in his chest. He yanks his dagger out of the assassin. "Your Majesty," Yoren says with the faintest of bows, his voice hoarse and breathless. King Edric stares, open-mouthed. "I think you'll need to start listening to what Alexander has to say." And with that, Yoren sits down on the steps of the dais and waits for Agrippa. Thank you for tuning in to Steelshod, a series by Mostly Rights, narrated by Taleforge. You can find every chapter in text format, as well as character sheets, setting information, maps, and rule documents on the Steelshod tabletop system in the link below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can pop down to the description and use the Patreon link for recurring donations, the paypal.me link for one-time donations, the Teespring link for shirts with the incredibly cool background art by Nobody, or use the DriveThruRPG affiliate link the next time you're looking to try a new system. If you'd like to support the author, you can find Steelshod merch on the mostlyrights.com store, or donate to the Mostly Rights Patreon, which are both linked on reddit.com/r/mostlyrights down below.